Hello and welcome. My name's Henry Normal, and I'm here on the first of 4 Zooms for Flapjack Press and the Manchester Libraries. And thanks for joining me. I hope you're all okay tonight. I thought the Zooms were a thing of the past, but no, they've kept going, and I'm glad they have, because it means we can reach people all over the world, which is great. And so wherever you are, I hope you're having a good evening. So what I'm doing is each week on a Wednesday night, I'm speaking to a different poet. They're all poets that are Flapjack Press poets, all northern, and they're all brilliant. So tonight's poet is no exception to that. It's a great way to kick off. It's a poet that I've met before, and I've read his work, and I'm very much enjoyed it. Very much going to enjoy talking to him. His first book, I've not read this one, but his first book was called Misery Begins at Home. I'm glad to say that he's cheered up a bit since then. So please welcome John Darwin.
Hi,
hey, John.
Nice to be here.
Are you all right?
I'm fine, thank you.
That intrigues me, that Misery Begins at Home. What inspired that?
I was just a play on words from the phrase charity begins at home. It was actually a non-anthology. It was a collection with 3 other poets. We're going back to 2010 now. And, you know, at the time, a lot of the stuff we were writing was fairly introspective and miserable. So it was a bit of a joke, but also fairly accurate in terms of the content. The contents of that book.
Yeah, I always think about the idea of twisting charity begins with clarity begins at home. Having misread it. So you've got a new book out. I've read your new book. I just managed to read it tonight before we started. Ultrasilence.
Yes.
Again, a great title. You're a good man with titles. What inspired that title?
Well, I mean, the book, I hesitate to say the book is about, but there's a strong theme in the book about human relationships, observing them, being part of them. I'm not talking romantic relationships, I'm talking the general things that we all go through in terms of interacting with each other, which interests me, fascinates me, and sometimes confuses me. Ultrasilence is my word for the sort of people who don't engage emotionally in any way, and they're kind of switched off. There may be many reasons for that. We're all different, of course, but that's just there is a poem called Ultrasilence in there, which sort of goes into more details about perhaps the difficulties of engaging with somebody who is emotionally absent.
Yeah, I understand that, and you know, it's possibly a generational thing as well. But I think a lot of people in the past, a lot of men in the past, were very much brought up to think that was a thing to achieve.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I come from a background of 2 very emotional parents, and I've probably followed in their footsteps. I say in a half-joking way, I've inherited the worst of both of my parents, but that's just a joke. But yeah, you're right. Certainly was a generational thing, and the generation before us, I suppose. But I think it's also just you know, something that you do come across from time to time with people of all generations. It's just a different type of personality, a different sort of approach.
I tell you what, it's sort of the antithesis of poetry, in a way, because obviously, you know, in your work, you know, you're not silent, and you're not unfeeling in any way. You know, it's there, definitely disguised at times, but laid bare. I noticed your previous book, I Meet Myself Returning, which I've read as well, seemed to have more drinking in it than the latest book.
Well, I mean, you know, I hope I haven't neglected the drinking in the new book. But yeah, I don't know. Again, it's a subject that I do touch upon quite a lot because it's part of my life. I think it's part of a lot of most people's lives actually, and again, quite often in a humorous way. But I guess it's a core part of our culture, and it's something that interests me, that I'm involved in. Not in any particular
well, it used to
way,
be, didn't it? It used to be the pub when I was 18. It was almost it replaced the church as the place you came together socially, once a week. In the same way that probably years before, you'd come together and meet other people, in a church setting.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's quite sad actually, because there's very few of the traditional pubs left, or their certainly number is diminishing. And Prestwich, where I live in North Manchester, which I do write about a fair bit as well, in terms of observing the changes that have happened here, and particularly the gentrification of it in the last 25 years that I've lived here. We have some lovely bars and restaurants and cafes, but and still a few traditional pubs, but I do like the traditional pub.
Now, I'm wanting you to read some poems for us tonight. So have you got one we can start off with?
Certainly. This is actually the opening poem from my new book, Ultrasilence, which I think is published on either the 24th or 26th of October, so it's coming out next month. And it's called Cows, and it goes like this. It starts with the cowlick curl of oils, the layers of an undiscovered Van Gogh, each knife cut and brushstroke visible but unnamed, colour and texture melded impasto. Sharp blue, knife cut and whipped to a point for the teeter of anticipated sex, the titter of the aftermath, the salt sea air drifting in through banging windows. Daub sunrise yellow, flattened and fattened by the knife, for the absent courage not needed at the start, arriving too late. Vermilion, zinc white, raw sienna, flipped in corners, barely seen by the casual observer, for the reigning confusion, the tears that rain. A badly drawn cow, Carl Smith, reception class 1, is how it ends.
Very nice, very nice. And so the book's coming out on Flapjack Press, and you're doing a launch, aren't you?
I am, Henry. It's a joint launch with Dominic Berry, whose book comes out at the same time, also on Flapjack, and it's on the 1st of November at the Central Library in Manchester from, I think, 6 p.m. It's a lovely venue. I launched my last book there as well, which was great. So I'm looking forward to that, yeah.
Oh, it's a gorgeous venue. I think, talking of religious settings, it's almost a cathedral to books, isn't it? I love the circular first floor. And in fact, I have the photo of me in there when I was about 29. Was on the cover of my first book for Flapjack, which was Travelling Second Class Through Hope. I'm a big fan of that. So that'll be great. And do you remember what Dominic's book's called?
Yes, Life. I think Paul will correct me. I believe it's called Yes, Life.
Yes,
Paul, is that right?
It is indeed.
Oh, there you are, the voice of God. Voices of, well, that's pretty good. I like you've got your own prompter. That's very good. So brilliant that. And I enjoyed that. So you do a regular night in Manchester, though, don't you?
Yes, I do. I've just started. In fact, the first night was last night at the Crooked Man bar in Prestwich, and it's called Crooked Poets. So we have an open mic and one special guest, which was Louise Fazacki last night. That was fantastic. So it's every month, generally the first Tuesday of the month. So we've
got to wait now for October, first Tuesday of October.
Yeah, that's right. So anyone who's interested, there's details on Facebook, or if you follow me on Twitter at Darwin Poet. I haven't put a dedicated Twitter account for that night yet, although I probably will. But yeah, that's just started. I did used to run a really great night with Genevieve Welsh in Halifax. Unfortunately, the pandemic and Genevieve moving to the darker parts of Lancashire has put an end to that. So I missed that a lot. So I wanted to carry on doing something on my own, really. So that's where Crooked Poets came from.
Well, I'm a bit of a crooked poet at the moment because I broke my arm.
Yes.
I thought I'd read you a little poem. I was trying to, I've written some funny poems about breaking my arm, but I was trying to, in the way that we do sometimes, and I've noticed in some of your poems, we try to sort of diary our inner landscapes. And try to work out what it is we're feeling and what it is we're thinking. And I was thinking about, you know, sort of breaking my arm and what the moments I'll remember about it, you know, in say, well, 20 years if I live that long, but you know, a few months, shall we say. Well, with my short-term memory, that's long enough. So this is called Fractured. My writing hand has become dead weight, lowering my head in humility. Memory twists under lids, shivering is painful. I've become a trainee ghost, travelling in thought and time. Balance is bruised, ambition broken, confidence an orphan child. I am at the mercy of virtue. A kebab stick is my closest friend. Sleep my chief physician. No longer adroit, I've joined the gauche and the sinister. Gravity and trigonometry continue, remembered or not. No need now for a knife, I'm redefined as spoon. The earth is always open to hugs. This skeleton displays damage. Trust in the left hemisphere is lost. Self-determination lies out of reach. I'm a man who makes mistakes. Empires rise and fall.
Very good.
The reason I say in that a kebab stick is my closest friend is because when it itches, that's the only way I can get to scratch down me. I've got like a cast type thing on here. What do you think about this idea of poetry as a description of inner landscape?
Well, yeah, I mean, I believe it is in many ways. I think one of the difficulties, not difficulties, one of the issues I have when talking to people about my poetry or poetry in general is that there's an assumption if you're writing in the first person that you're actually writing an autobiographical account. That may be the case, it may be partly be the case, it may not be the case at all. So, you know, when you're writing about stuff that's perhaps emotional, sometimes close to the bone, then you can find yourself being questioned by people that you know well about what you mean by certain things. So I just wanted to make that point that, and I think most poets will tell you, it's not pure autobiography. Sometimes.
Oh no, I think you can get several experiences and put them together.
Exactly.
And create you know, something that's what I used to do when I first started out. I don't know whether you've ever done this. Is I'd say she instead of he.
Right.
And people would say to me, they'd say, Henry, how can you write so well about women? and I'd say, well, I'm just writing about myself, but saying it's a woman. And there's not that much incredible difference. I'm in touch with my feminine side. I'm sure you are. Well, it seems so from the poems. So I think there's we can try and capture this thing that we do of being particular and universal at the same time. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think one of the beauties of poetry, and I think one of the reasons I'm a poet rather than a short story writer or a novelist, is I've got quite a short attention span. I like things to be brief, to the point, quite clipped, and you know, you can say a lot in a few words. I think when you're writing good poetry, I'm not saying mine's particularly good, but the best poetry I think says a lot in very few words.
Oh, I always get worried if I go over the page.
Yeah. I mean, my new book, I think there's 2 poems that go over more than the page, maybe 3. But as you've seen, the majority of mine are short. Some of them very short, but I think generally sort of 10 to 14 lines, 3 or 4 verses, and then that's enough for me.
My wife Angela sort of splits my things into different categories when she's reading them, and she says that there's ones where it's a single image that you're expounding on, ones where it's several images and you're using the juxtaposition of several images, and she says there's others that are just rubbish.
Yeah.
He calls them half poems. Like you've started a thought, but you've not finished it.
Yeah. Well, I think my wife actually just tends towards the third. Rubbish.
But it's interesting that idea of the single image, because I was one of the things that when I started off writing, I took a break whilst I was doing television for about 20 years, and one of the things that drew me back to writing was looking at photographs. And it's interesting when you look at a photograph, because in a sense it's a single image, but once you look around the photograph, you've actually got lots of different parts that you can describe, and it's actually lots of images. So sometimes you're drawn by a single image, and sometimes by the juxtaposition of other images. Do you find that?
Yeah, I do. In fact, sometimes I've written not about photographs, but inspired by photographs. So you might have picked up in the stuff you've read that I've got a bit of an obsession with Turkey. I do write quite a lot about Turkey, particularly Istanbul. There's a great Turkish photographer called Arıgüler who's no longer with us, but I've got a poem in the previous book called Rascal, which is inspired by one of his photos of an old style sort of steamboat going under a bridge on the Bosphorus. So I do get inspired actually by photographic images.
Why Turkey? Because you're right. Certainly in Meet Myself Returning, there's a whole sort of section of Turkey. Yeah. Isn't there? What drew you to that?
I suppose. I mean, I've been going there for between 25 and 30 years. I think when I first went there, I'm not a particularly widely travelled person. It's such a different, I mean, obviously without any religious connotations, we've grown up in a sort of Judeo-Christian background, and obviously Turkey, while it's not an Islam, I need to be very clear, it's not an Islamic state, it's a secular state. But it's a completely different culture, so that drew me in straight away. I just so there's a sort of exoticism about it, I suppose, and I just really liked it. I started to learn the language, so I speak the language now. So I became then interested in Turkish culture, Turkish poetry and literature, and it's just it's really hard to explain why. It's just, I suppose, at that point in my life, I was still a young man, went somewhere completely different, sort of fell in love with it, and then began researching and looking into it.
I had a similar thing with Portugal, and I've written quite a few poems about Portugal, and I used to have a villa in Portugal. And one of the things I loved about it, it sounds like we're on the same street here, is that it made me look at England in a different way, and everything that I do different from what the way they do things in Portugal. I had to question and say, well, what do I think about it? What do I think about the difference? What do I? And I like that, because it made me question things that were quite ordinary, and also it brought a different vocabulary, different language, not just the Portuguese, but having to look at the way things were done and the landscape of Portugal, and think about words that I wouldn't normally use. And I do love that. And I notice that in your choice of language, there's very little repetition of all the words throughout the books that you use, because you can fall into this thing, can't you, of having 20 poems that say sea, sky, clouds. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. If you're not careful, you can use the same words. I mean, you've written many poems, so you could fall into this idea of using the first words that come to mind that you might call the ABC words. Yeah. And one of the things I love about your poems is that you seem, I don't know whether I've missed the early stuff, but you seem very particular in the words that you use.
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, I tried to be clipped and brief, really, not too many adjectives. I do find myself mentioning ginnels and bridges a lot for some reason, but particularly since, you know, I've written a series of poems about local areas. I do a lot of walking. I don't have a day job any longer. I'm retired, so I'm a full-time poet now, if you can call yourself that. So I do a load of walking, always have done, around the area, observing people and characters and so on. And there's just a load of ginnels around here, so I'm always
there's a lot of ginnels. There's not much rhymes with ginnels, but you don't do many rhymes anyway. So that's you do actually do. I've noticed some bits of the poems rhyme and some bits don't. Which is an interesting way of doing it. So do you just allow the rhyme when it comes, and then you don't force it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think for good reason I avoid rhyming couplets by and large. There's a bit of a habit I've got of rhyming the last couplet or the last couple of lines, which are kind of like, I need to be careful that doesn't become a bit of a cliche.
Yeah, well, it's not always the last couple. I've noticed, you know, and you do some internal rhyming on some of them, but it always seems very natural. It doesn't seem like you're forcing it, which it can do if you stick strictly to it, especially a chime rhyme.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I started out, which was fairly late in life, really, it was only about 2008 I started, even though I'd considered myself a poet. Before that, I didn't actually get around to writing any poems. But when I did start writing the initial stuff, you know, obviously I cringe a bit when I look back on most of it, would be, you know, some forced rhyme in there. And that's just something you need to, it's a learning process, isn't it? What works, what doesn't work, and finding your own style or the voice, as people say, is really important. That does take a while.
Yeah. Now, I'm conscious that I want to get some more of your poetry in, so give you another one.
Okay, fine. I'm going to read one now. It's a bit more humorous, called "Rest in Peace, John Wesley." Yeah. I'm under house arrest for crimes against the Methodists. Took a drink, enjoyed myself too much. Read erotic fiction, encouraged an erection. Had a cheeky bet on some old nag. Wandered lost and lonely on a horse, reflecting Wesley on his lonesome quest for misery and tears. Found a home 10 miles away. In the age of horse, a chasm. Won my bet, drowned in whiskey. Cheers.
Nice. So there's a great variety of stuff that you do, and as you say, not everything's autobiographical.
No.
You point the finger elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that there's, you know, again, in a light-hearted way. So my mother's family are from South Wales and from a kind of non-conformist Methodist background, and I've grown up with tales of how it was to go to the chapel, and I remember the generation before who were very religious, and you know, this kind of, so that's something that interests me, and the kind of, you know, there's a lot of good intentions and good work done by Methodists or other religious people, but I just find it a really miserable, soul-destroying thing.
Yeah, I would love to be to actually have faith and be religious and believe and to genuinely believe, not fake it, but to actually believe. I would love that. And you know, when you see people on television and they're singing away in some choir, and they got nice shiny apple face, and they look like they're clean and wholesome, and I always look at them and I think, I'd love to be like that.
Really, I wouldn't.
Yeah, but I can't do it because I've got some little part of me is questioning it. So I can't give it full. But considering the amount that people have done for religion over the years, you know, the cathedrals that have been built and everything, a very powerful thing.
Extremely. I mean, actually, I love religious music. Funnily enough, in my later years, I've got into classical and also particularly choral and sacred music. And I've got no religion at all, but I love some of that music, and I love some of the buildings, which are just awesome, fantastic.
Gorgeous,
you're not going to persuade me to have any religion. That's just the way I am.
You know, I love everything about it in the way that I love brass band music. but you know, because there's no ego in brass band music, and there's a sort of a lovely atmosphere to it, but it's that sort of having to make that leap of faith that I've never quite got. But aesthetically, it's and the other religions as well.
Of course, yeah.
There's something there. Now, why did you start writing poetry? Because you started quite late, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I was in my 40s. Well, as I said to you, I wasn't joking. I'd always wanted or considered myself to be a poet. I did music when I was in my teens and 20s. I was in a band and I wrote songs. Always been into words. You know, even to this day, most of the music I listen to, I'm listening to the words more than the music. In fact, I know some people who say I've never listened to. I don't listen to words. I'm not interested in the words. I only hear the rhythm, or you know, I'm interested in the melody. I'm sort of the opposite. So that's sort of a roundabout way of saying, yeah, I always wanted to, and I finally got round to it. And as we all know, there's only two noble occupations in this world, and that's being a footballer and a poet. And I think I've probably just gone over the hill for the football a bit. So I've taken the second option. Second most noble profession.
Well, yeah. In Manchester, of course, you've got the great Cantona to aspire to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great man.
I once sat next to him in the Corner House Cafe.
All right, yeah.
I've got to say that is strikes me as a moment I won't forget in my life. I've sat next to many people, but Cantona is a particular.
He didn't try and kung fu kick you, did he?
He didn't. Or me scone. So I was in luck. So funnily enough, football, of course, you and I used to play football together, didn't we?
We did many years ago. The memory's faded a bit, but we definitely did. Yeah.
I'd like to say it was an all-stars 11. Because we had people like John Bramwell from I Am Clued playing with us, and I think Brian Glancy, the late Brian Glancy, played with us. Can you remember anybody else that people would know? Any other poets?
I think Steve Coogan's younger brother, possibly.
Brendan Coogan, he played, that's right.
Yeah,
and possibly Kev Coogan as well. Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
Steve never played, to be honest with you, because he's no interest in sport. That's not going to make him any money. No. So
Dave Gorman.
Dave Gorman, that's right. Yes. Oh, Dave was a good player. Yes, yeah.
Yes.
So it's interesting that you've stayed in Manchester. But you're not from Manchester originally, are you?
No, I was born in home counties. I grew up in Yorkshire from the age of 10, and I've been in Manchester since '91, which was when I probably originally met you, around about that time. So I've been here over 30 years. Mainly because of the football, to be honest with you. I don't go anymore. I don't go to United anymore anyway. But yeah, settled here, and it's very much my home. I love it.
Now I'm gonna read you a poem I've written recently. It's picking up on your pointing the finger elsewhere. Although I've got to say this one is inspired by my own fear as much as anybody else's. With the because it was Liz Truss got to be Prime Minister, it's her turn apparently yesterday, and there's a lot of thought at the moment about energy bills, and I find it all quite frightening. And when I see some of the people that are at the cutting edge of it, it reminds me of times in my life when I didn't have enough to get by. So this is it's a poem called "Where Once the Post Brought Promise." Where once the post brought promise, fear has found a hole. It's oozing through the door. It conceals itself in envelopes and preys upon the poor. Fear thrives in black and white, but soon it turns to blood. It's there when you close your eyes where hope itself once stood. Fear turns tears to ice. It lays bare every room. It chills the unborn child in debt within the womb. Fear seeps through the kitchen. It empties out the shelves. Fear breeds in the bathroom where people harm themselves. I'll say it right in a second. Fear pervades your pillow, invades your breakfast bowl. Fear is there within your dreams. Fear has found a hole.
Nice.
So using very much an AB full rhyming thing, which I don't normally do, but it seemed when I came up with the phrase "fear has found a hole," because I was afraid of the bills coming through. It seemed to take that form. Do you find when you're writing a poem, you'll write a couple of lines and then it'll dictate the form?
Yeah, definitely. So I've got a poem in my new book, which is called "It's What You Were That Matters," and it's about sort of clearing out the belongings of someone who's passed away. And again, I don't know if you find this as well, but that poem came very quickly, but it's also in rhyme, fairly formal rhyme in form. It just seemed natural. As I say, I wrote it very quickly. There was very few edits once I'd written the first version, but it just lent itself to that form, like that poem you just read did as well.
Yeah, and then once it's dictated, I find I can't change it then. And I'll get something and I go, oh, I could make an haiku out of that, and it won't happen because it's already in my head.
Yes.
In the in the form that it's come out of. So when you was a kid, the old idea at school of poetry, certainly for me, seemed very old-fashioned. Was there a point when it stopped becoming old-fashioned for you?
It definitely. I mean, I did English and English A level at school, including poetry. People like Robert Frost. I remember us doing Chaucer, obviously Shakespeare. Nothing particularly modern. Certainly, probably nothing even 20th century. I think. Yeah, and it didn't grasp me at the time, and I think partly that's because I think the young brain or mind finds it hard to grasp some of just poetry in general. And I know if you're a young genius and so on, you might well pick it up and appreciate it at a very young age and start writing it even. But it didn't touch me really until much later on. And I think, and I came to, as I say, really through music and through love of good lyrics, and eventually began to appreciate poetry. So even some of the stuff I did at school, so Robert Frost at school, I just thought it was crap. In my young, naive, and stupid mind, some of it's fantastic. So
of course, is it? Yeah. Have you been listening to any of there's been a season on BBC 4. Have you watched any of the programmes?
Is that a poetry thing?
It's a poetry season. Yeah, Lem Sisse did the trailers for it, and I think there's about from what I've seen, there's about 12 different programmes. And there was one Maya Angelou. I think some of them are like old programs. Like Maya Angelou, Earth Story was on, and then there was a separate program where she went to Scotland to talk about Burns. Mm-hmm. And then there's been some the poetry of the last century, and taking you through all the different poets. Well, I say all the different poets, some of the different poets. Mm-hmm. But lots of different ones. There's a few programs about Larkin. I think they're still up on iPlayer if you're interested. If anybody listens,
I'll definitely pick that up actually. But if you listen to any of Frank Skinner's poetry podcasts, I think those are really good as well.
I've not. No. Yeah.
That was really interesting. It's introduced me to some poets I didn't know. He's just, I mean, I like him anyway. He's just a good presenter, and he's funny, and he absolutely adores poetry. And the way he speaks about it is so enthusiastic, and I think well informed as well. So
yeah, of course, I've worked with Frank, and he's always had a penchant for that. Now, I've just remembered that we have a chat facility, which I should have mentioned earlier. They're dreadful presenting. I should get now. We've had some comments down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open out to anybody who wants to ask John a question. If you put it on the chat facility, and we'll read them out. So let's have a look what we've got so far. Somebody's liking the fear poem. That's Eva. Thank you, Eva. Eva's over there in Belgium, so that makes us international. You're international, John.
Oh,
not international.
but no one's got any questions for me. So.
Oh, they might have. You never know. They have the opportunity. That's all we can do, is give people the opportunity, and it's up to them after that. Good time then, whilst people are having to think about that, for you to do as a third poem. Okay, well, this is kind of an observational one, and a local one, I suppose, as well. And again, it's not based entirely in truth, but it's about a character who wanders around in my local area, and I've decided he's an antique dealer fallen on hard times, and that's the title of the poem. Yeah. Antique dealer fallen on hard times. Hatted with a taut tea cosy, scraping oversized shoes, dragging a mauve-wheeled suitcase through the precinct of pigeon spikes and early closed bank. It's a friendly face thing, says the toothy model in the window, banking on your terms. He trawls through cancer research, all aboard and headway for valuable gems. The felted hat from Georgian times, Elizabethan Beano annuals, a floaty chemise from Napoleonic France, Henry's pewter tankard, a cracked cup, papal visit, 1982. That's reminding me of all the jumble sales I used to go to as a kid. And I always used to get the, I don't know whether you ever seen them, radio and TV fun book.
Oh, yeah.
And I used to love them. They used to get them for about twopence. And I used to read all the jokes in them. It used to make me laugh. That's good. That's a good illustration, that poem, of so the way you use a particular language is particular images that are slightly off centre ground. And I love that. There's nothing in both the books I've read. There's nothing obvious. Mm-hmm. You know, with some poetry, I can basically guess the next line. It's a bit like you know, when you hear the setup for a joke. Sometimes you know what the punchline is. And me and my wife, we do play that on television if there's a sitcom and it's particularly bad. We'll pause it and then guess the next line. See who wins. Invariably, my wife Angela wins that game. But it's something very. So is that something you're conscious of? That striving to not be obvious?
I don't particularly strive for it. I'm glad you think I achieve it. I mean, I think I am conscious of avoiding cliches, although I do like, and you can't avoid cliches in their entirety. But and sometimes, you know, when I'm editing a poem, I'll knock words out that I feel are too obvious or too cliched. But you know, I like to think, and I take what you've said as a compliment. I like to think that's just my voice and my style. And you know, it's developed over over the years.
You become conscious that I'm conscious sometimes. If I say I write a poem and I use the word eyes, and then I might look at putting something before then, we'll say like tired eyes, and go, oh, no. How many times have I heard the word tired eyes? So then I go closing eyes. Well, no, I'm not sure that. And then I end up just putting eyes or something else. It's I get very conscious, especially after I've written it, and then I look back, for the second reading, that I don't want to. Because in conversation we do that, don't we? In conversation very often, because it's a looser form of communication. We use, as you say, stock phrases and cliches, but also cliches in both the choice of the words we use, but the accompanying words and adjectives, and whereas when you're committing it and you're committing it to paper, and it's going to be in a book forever, you need to be a little bit more judicious.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can't achieve perfection, but I think when I started out, and people, other poets or writers would say you've got to edit your stuff. You've got to really pay great attention to detail. And initially I just thought that's a lot of crap. My stuff's great anyway, which it wasn't, of course. And as time's gone, I guess I do pay more attention to detail. I'm not somebody who has 8 or 9 drafts of every poem. I do throw poems away sometimes that are not going to work, but generally it's really important to pay that attention to detail and make it as good as you possibly can.
Yeah. Now we've got a question here for you, John. You said you won't want to get one, but you have got one.
Marvelous.
Hello, John. Why do you choose to write poetry rather than prose? Is it the technical challenge, or does the content dictate this?
Very good question. I sort of touched on this earlier. I'm very interested. Well, number one, I love poetry.
Yeah.
I have written prose. I've written for fanzines and stuff in the past. Nothing great. It just doesn't grab me in the same way. I'm not saying I won't at any point write some short stories, or God forbid, I may even write a novel. I don't know. But at the moment, and for the time I've been writing, poetry is what I do, I think, because the person asked the question used the word challenge. That it's a challenge to say something or to get across whatever idea, feeling, or opinion, even, although there's hopefully there aren't too many opinions in my poems, but in a brief, concise, clipped and clear way. I
write some stuff that borders on the two, and I think about a definition by one. It's partly due to is it about communicating my perception of the world, and even if I'm saying something but I'm trying to say something else behind it, does it fulfill that? And is it to do with, as you say, the precise use of language, but also it's partly the intent rather than whether it fills a particular form. Yeah,
absolutely. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, well, I hope so. That's good. No, I did have another. I had quite a good question myself there, but it slipped out of my mind. So we should mention Flapjack, and they're a brilliant Manchester-based publisher. So how did you come across Flapjack?
I think I've always been conscious. I mean, I'm not sure how long it's been in existence, but certainly for a good few years. And like in any area, in any kind of community, I suppose you get to know people and you get to meet people who've been published by them, and I suppose it's just something I became aware of. I had met Paul many years ago, actually, and I sent in the script for I Make Myself Returning, and thankfully, he agreed to publish it that three and a half years ago. So yeah, that's how I came to have my relationship with Flapjack. Long may it continue.
Good, good, and there's a great bunch of poets that it's lovely to be part of, sort of the community, if you like.
Yeah.
So who do you read as a poet? Do you read other poets at all?
I read all the time. Well, I say all the time, not 24 hours a day. Something to say to people who say, "What have you got any tips?" You've got to read everything and anything, really. So it's always a difficult question. Who do I read? Well, I read such a broad range of poets. I suppose you mentioned Larkin earlier, and he's really unfashionable, but I just love him. I always carry a Larkin book with me. And people in the past have said I'm as miserable as Philip Larkin. I'm certainly not as talented or so on, but he's unfashionable for a number of reasons, and partly the style of his work, and also because obviously stuff's come out about his opinions and so on, which aren't very tasteful. But I've always been in the opinion that you separate the artist from the
I find it very difficult, John, to be honest with you, because he is obviously a racist. And the wording in his letters is brutal and ugly. And when I first tried to read Larkin, I must admit, as a sort of fervent working class lad, I found there was a sort of a middle class sneer that I detected, a sort of an intolerance. Even with Whitsun Wedding and things like that, which I know are lauded, and I wanted desperately to like him, because I like miserable people, and technically he's great, and he's got some good poems, and I wanted him to be on our side, and for me to be on his side, but I couldn't take to him, and this was before his letters come out. And then when I saw the television program about it, it struck me that, I'd always thought that there was an intolerance that I can't condone in myself, and therefore I don't want to laud other people that are selling that.
Well, I'd take the point entirely. I mean, his views. I'd take your point about the slight sneer. I mean, he's old-fashioned. He was writing a long time ago, and he was an old-fashioned academic. But I think I'm right in saying his racist opinions don't come across in his poetry. But I do take your point. And
it's weird, isn't it? As you say, his racing doesn't come across. Thank goodness. It's a funny idea, though, as to whether or not you can separate the art and the artist from the man or the woman. In any case, there's this sculpture that's a particularly good sculpture on the BBC radio building, and until I realized that the sculptor was a paedophile, I thought what a great sculpture it was, and then you start looking at it with other eyes, so it spoils it a little bit. Well, it spoils it a lot, to be frank. I would like to think that part of the soul of the creative person comes through the work. I try not to hide my darker side, small though it is. It's there in stuff, and I'm intolerant at times. But it's a difficult one, isn't it? I wonder how many people we would lose, and how much work we would lose if we did a full audit.
Yeah, this is a good point, actually. I mean, something Frank Skinner is always saying is he doesn't want to know about the in this case, the poet doesn't want the biography. He doesn't want to know anything about them personally. He just wants to read the poetry.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a slightly different take or a different angle on the same point, really, about I'm interested in poetry. I don't want to know the person. But then when you do find out stuff about the person that's distasteful or worse, then obviously I can see why that would cloud your opinion.
So
Although
sometimes it can affect the imagery, can't it? Because it's coming from a different place. And you may have misconstrued the image, or you've invented your own imagery. And I suppose we all do that, especially with people from previous generations who we don't know. I mean, we take Shakespeare at face value, but whether or not he had any particular intolerances.
Well, I would imagine he did.
Certainly of the time. I mean, 600 years, we'll forgive him a bit. We've come on a lot since the 70s, haven't we?
Yeah.
Let's be right. So that's going some. I'm glad we had that discussion, because it's something that's swept under the carpet a bit, isn't it?
Yeah, and I do understand the different views on it. I perfectly understand what you're saying, but it seems you didn't like him initially anyway. For I guess slightly different reasons, although maybe that was coming through, his soul was coming through in your dislike of him in the first place. I don't know, getting too deep.
I think it's the working class thing. I'm a little bit touchy on that. Now we've got I think it's a question from William Thirsk Gaskill. I've heard you reading from memory. This must be you, John, because it's not me. I heard you read, how and when does memorising your poetry fit into your creative process?
Good question. Hello, William. I think it goes back to what we were talking about with sometimes the words dictate the form, or the form comes into play very early on in the writing of the poem. So many times, I don't know about you, Henry, but you may write in your head to start with. I often do, and then before you get it on paper or on a computer or your phone, and the poems, I find poems with a certain form, particularly obviously there's a rhyming structure, to be very easy to memorise. Some of the poems in my new book, you've noticed I'm reading from a tablet here. I don't know off by heart, and that's probably part of the process and the structure or the type of poems they are. So I think the poem I mentioned earlier is What You Were Matters. It's one of my longer poems. It may even go over a page, but I just find it, and I would never, I hope I would never forget that. Whereas other poems that are much shorter, I find harder to memorise. Maybe that's an age thing anyway. So I think the answer to William's question is it depends what type of poem, really. I don't consciously make an effort to memorise, although if I'm going to perform poems, I will try to do that. So something I've not mentioned, actually, I know we're running out of time, but I won the best spoken word performance at the Greater Manchester Fringe in 2021.
Yeah.
So that's another sort of string to my bow, or another thing I'm interested in, actually, and I'll speak really quickly to get this point over. But the poetry itself, I love, obviously, but the show I did, it was a 45-minute show. Obviously, there was poetry in it, but it was linking the poems together and remembering that chunk of linkage as well as the poems themselves was quite a challenge. But that's something I really want to do more of in future. I think my new book, I'll probably create a show around some of the poems in.
Oh, that'll be great.
For probably early in next year.
Well, I've got to say, I take my hat off to anybody that can memorise anything. I find it very difficult to remember my own name sometimes. So I've written about 1,000 poems, and if I tried to remember any of them, I don't think there'd be any room for me to write any more. So I purposefully don't remember. I purposely read them. There's something quite nice about reading a poem and reminding yourself, what it's about. Sometimes when I see people sort of memorizing poems, I often wonder if the energy is not on the remembering as opposed to the feeling. of it. That's one of the things I tell myself because I've got a bad memory.
I think there's, I mean, a couple of points on that for me. I've seen when you read your poems from the page, you're reading them well, or at least you're not performing them because it's not a performance as such. Yeah. But I've come across, I've seen poetry readings of well-known and very accomplished poets who just literally read from the page, and it's rubbish like that. The other extreme of that is the performance poet who is almost an actor, and the words are almost irrelevant. So maybe I fall somewhere in the middle of that.
Well, I think you communicate the meaning of the words, which I think is the what I've found. If you give the same poem to an actor, yeah, they always grandstand the end.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Yeah. And I was thinking, oh no, because very often the end's to be thrown away, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, two poets and old poets, and one of them's your favourite, Philip Larkin. I'm sure you've heard him read his own stuff, and he's very kind of plodding and without feeling. And the other one who I do love as well, is part in the Welsh heritage, Dylan Thomas. Have you heard him?
Yes. Oh, I love Dylan Thomas. Yeah.
I love Dylan Thomas.
There is a sort of thing though that when I was a kid, it did strike me that people were putting on a voice.
Yeah,
and that's something I balked against. So having a Nottingham accent, I always try to read I don't try and go American or do you know what I mean, guys? And that idea of I mean, John Egley does a good parody of the way the older poets used to read. So I think there's something about the poem being of your voice that you use. Your bloody voice. Now we are running short, so can you finish it off with a poem? Next week I've got Janine Booth that I'm talking to, and Janine is a powerhouse of poetry, very political, very socially political, a great performer. I was on with her last week in Lewes in Sussex. And she is just a natural, I would say, like a stick of rock. She's poet written all the way through. So do join me next week for that. But to finish us off tonight, John, it's been lovely chatting to you. I hope you enjoyed it.
I'm really happy. It's been fantastic, Henry. Despite our disagreement, at least we didn't come to blows. What have you got for us to end with? A really short poem because we're short of time. It's called Mothers. Right. In the lee of the hill, the mizzle of Mosley, where dads don't explain why mothers leave early. From unfeathered nests, leaving kids without nurture for the scratch of the branch and scars unacknowledged. Girls named as heroines of old melodramas, Catherine, Rebecca, and someone or another. There's nothing as sad as a child with no mother.
That's a great poem.
Thanks, Henry.